You know, a burst pipe, a leaky roof, a washing machine that just goes haywire, it's one of those chaotic, incredibly stressful moments for any homeowner. But what's really going on when the water gets in? Well, let's break it down. We're going to dive into the anatomy of a water damage crisis, and we'll use the unique challenges of a coastal environment to guide us.
And that brings us to the big question, right? Why is a simple leak, something that could happen anywhere, so much more destructive when you live near the coast? The answer, as you'll see, isn't just about the ocean itself. It's about a whole combination of powerful environmental factors all working together. So, to really get to the bottom of this, here's our game plan. We're going to start with what we're calling the coastal water threat. Then we'll see how a property goes from just wet to totally wrecked. After that, we'll walk through the restoration playbook, decode what the pros are actually doing, and wrap it all up with an emergency action plan that you can actually use.
All right, first up, the coastal water threat. Look, in a place like Fernandina Beach, Florida, this problem is so much bigger than a little bit of water. The environment itself is practically working against you from the moment a drop gets in.
First, you've got the really obvious threats from the outside. Things like hurricanes, and even those regular king tides can literally push seawater inland. And we're not talking about clean water here. This is corrosive, contaminated floodwater that gets into everything. It's a whole different ballgame.
And you know, even on a beautiful sunny day, the air itself is an issue. That constant salty air is just relentlessly weakening building materials. It's eating away at pipe fittings, roof flashing, basically creating these little vulnerabilities just waiting for the next big storm.
And then there's the humidity. In a subtropical climate, the relative humidity can hang out above 75% pretty much all year long. What that means is the air is already heavy with moisture, so when a leak happens, you've already got the perfect breeding ground for mold. The air doesn't help dry things out, it actually makes it worse.
So you see, it's not just one thing, it's how it all works together. The coastal environment makes things break down faster, and that high humidity just makes sure that even a tiny minor leak has a much higher chance of turning into a huge mold disaster.
So when you combine all these threats, it brings us right to our next section, from wet to wrecked. Because once that water gets in, a clock starts ticking, and it's a really urgent timeline before secondary damage like mold and rot really takes hold.
Just look at how fast this escalates. You've got this tiny, critical window, maybe 24 to 48 hours before mold spores start setting up shop on wet surfaces. Then within just a few days, you're seeing real physical damage. Your wood floors start to swell up and buckle. And if you let it go for weeks, the actual structural integrity of your home could be at risk. Yeah, the clock is definitely not your friend here.
Okay, so that all sounds pretty bad, right? But there is a way to fight back against this chaos. And that brings us to the restoration playbook. This is the methodical, proven process that the professionals use to stop that ticking clock and actually reverse the damage. And it all boils down to these three distinct phases. First is emergency mitigation. Think of it as stopping the bleeding. Second is scientific structural drying. And finally, you have restoration and rebuild, which is all about getting the property back to the way it was.
So phase 1, mitigation, is all about immediate damage control. Technicians come in, they stop the source of the water, they use these super powerful extractors to get rid of all the standing water, and then they start removing materials, like soaked drywall, that just can't be saved. Then comes the science part. Structural drying isn't just, pointing a couple of fans at a wet spot. Nope. It means setting up industrial-grade dehumidifiers and high-velocity air movers to create a very specific, controlled drying environment. The whole goal is to pull every last bit of trapped moisture out of everything, the wood framing, the subfloors, until moisture meters confirm it's all dry according to strict industry standards. And only when everything is verified as 100% dry does the rebuild phase begin. This is when the crews come back in and install all the new materials, drywall, flooring, cabinets, paint, to meticulously put the property back to exactly how it was before the damage ever happened.
So that's the playbook, but let's peel back another layer here in our fourth section, decoding the pros process. Because professional restoration isn't just guesswork, it's a real science, and it's governed by some seriously rigorous standards to make sure the job is done right.
It all starts with classifying the water itself. You've got Category 1, which is clean water from a supply line. Then Category 2, or gray water, which is a bit contaminated. Think of a dishwasher overflow. But Category 3, black water, is seriously contaminated. And here's the key part. Storm surge and seawater are always considered Category 3, which means they require extensive safety protocols.
And who sets these standards? Well, it's this organization, the IICRC. They're a nonprofit that creates all the science-backed rules for the entire industry. So when a company says they're IICRC-certified, it means their team is trained to follow this specific, proven rulebook for getting a building dry safely and completely.
And this really highlights why trying to do this yourself is just such a huge risk. Your household fans, they can't get that trapped moisture out. And without thermal cameras or moisture meters, you have no clue if the inside of your wall is still totally soaked. A professional response, on the other hand, uses all that specialized gear and provides the detailed paperwork that your insurance company is absolutely going to require.
Okay, this brings us to our final and honestly most important section. If this ever happens to you, if you're ever faced with a water emergency, what do you do in those first critical 60 minutes? Here is your action plan.
First, the do's. If you can do it safely, shut off the water source. Your very next phone call should be to a certified restoration company. Remember, that clock is ticking. Then, go to your breaker box and shut off electricity to all the wet areas. Move your valuables, your electronics, get them somewhere dry, and start taking photos of everything to document the damage for your insurance claim.
Now, just as important are the don'ts. Do not wait to call for help. Do not use your regular wet/dry shop vac on a lot of standing water. That's a huge electrocution risk. If you see a ceiling that's sagging, stay out of that room. And please, especially in a humid climate, never assume it'll just air dry. That is basically just an open invitation for a massive mold problem.
Which leaves us with this one last thought. Just because you can't see any more water, does that really mean your home is dry? The most important takeaway here is this. Real safety doesn't come from a surface that looks dry. It comes from a structure that has been scientifically verified as completely, truly dry.